Welcome to the MESAM podcast. This is the podcast where we talk to MESAM members and associates about their current or recent research into the medieval world of Central Europe. I'm Karen Culver. Today I'm meeting with Olga Kalashnikova here in Vienna and with Jan Kremer over Zoom. And we're going to be discussing not exactly medieval history. We're going to be discussing video games. Doing history today. Olga studied history at the Moscow State University and then transferred to CEU Medieval Studies for her MA and her PhD. She graduated in 2024 with a thesis, Preaching the Passion in 14th Century Bohemia, the Rhetoric of Good Friday Sermons. While her research includes the more traditional topics of medieval passion piety, sermons and preachings, Olga also researches some more contemporary themes, notably the political use of the Middle Ages in contemporary Russia and how video games represent a new medieval period. Consequently, and always in the cause of academic research, she gets to play an awful lot of games.
Hello, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Jan studied history and archive studies at the Faculty of Arts at Charles University, where he now teaches historical game studies. That must be a pretty unusual subject, I reckon. He is a trained medievalist and works at the Centre for Medieval Studies of the Czech Academy of Sciences in Prague. In recent years, he's been researching representations of the past in digital games. Together with Olga, he's organised conferences, gave lectures on gaming medievalism in Central and Eastern Europe. He's employed by the Národní filmový archive in Prague as the head of the pixelarchive.cz project, dedicated to preserving digital games. Jan is a committed environmentalist. He's founded 2 ecological initiatives in Prague and loves all places that are cold, forested and hilly. Jan, Olga, welcome to the MESAM podcast.
Thank you.
Hello.
Now, I will admit I'm looking forward to this interview because I love history, but I know absolutely nothing about gaming at all, which takes me straight to my first question. Please, is there an agreed definition? And is it a video game, a digital game? What is it?
So, thank you very much for this question. I think it's essential first to define what we are working with. And I would say that, well, there is no precise definition of this medium, but there is something we can work with. And first of all, I guess we should decide which term we are using, whether it's video game or a digital game. So I would say that a video game does not work in our case because it's digital. So it means that we can run it on a console or a PC or a phone, so a certain device. And this game contains several essential elements. So it's not only video, but also sound, graphics, narrative, a set of rules we are working with.
Do we have any numbers or demographic indicators for gamers? And within the gaming world, is medievalism popular?
I would say that it is huge. Digital games became mass media worldwide. And for example, in the EU, we have some data from Germany. The average age of gamer is 40. So the games are not toys anymore. And if we are talking about like how many people play games, so we can say that according to statistics, 60% of us play games on a regular basis. And also, as it was in the past, entertainment for boys mostly. Nowadays, almost 50% of all gamers are women. So it's becoming more and more inclusive. Also, when we look at the economic numbers, if we compare the profits generated by digital games worldwide, it is always more than the movies, the music industry, and all the VOD platforms generate together. So the games became really a big business. So yes, games are very influential as a mass media. And also, if we are talking about historical games, so games connected with the past or representations of the past, always like when we look on top 10, top 20, or top 100 top sold games, we can say that 20% of those games are always historical games. So we can say history sells.
It's good to know that history sells. Scary numbers, though, that 60% of people play games.
I would say that we have the same data for Russia, actually, according to the recent polls. Yeah, games are really popular.
Yeah. I guess it's because you can get inside and interact with them, which you can't if you're listening to music.
I would say yes, because games are actually super interactive, and that's the main value of them as an educational tool, as a tool which transmits a certain vision of history to you. Because as opposed to, listening to music or watching some video clips or films or whatever, basically when you play with history, you can sort of touch it, you can experience it, and hence you can feel the periods. The feeling of the past which you get is completely different. It's maybe more authentic.
Yeah, if I may add, I think Adam Chapman, who is a famous game historian, he defines a game by playing, because if the game sits on your hard drive, it's not a game. It becomes a game when you play it because it's interactive. So you are interacting with the representations in the game, which is the reading of the game, and then you are interacting with the rules of the games, which is doing. And so when you are playing, you are doing those both things at once. And if you are talking about historical games, then you are in this way creating history, because as the title of Chapman's book says, digital games as history. Lots of players see games as authentic, accurate, so it represents for them history. So this is something which is really special for games as media. But also not only interactivity, but for example, performativity, which they have in common, for example, with theater or other kinds of performance, because you are performing as a historical figure, as a historical character. So you're always playing as yourself, taking part in the past, in the history, if we are talking about historical games. This is, I think, the appeal of games, especially historical games.
Yeah, I can get that. But you're both taking an academic approach to studying games, and I understand there are different ways of studying digital games and gamers. Please, can you explain what these are?
Yeah, I think there are like three main point of views how to study what we call games. So usually, like most of the research done so far is that historian is playing a historical game, and he or she is then kind of criticizing the game or analyzing the game, and he or she is writing about it. Then we have another way when the historian or game scholar is researching the how the games were created. So he's focusing on the developers. So how they design the games and how they use history to create their games. This is the second point of view. But there is also the most under-researched one. The third point of view is to study the audience, so the players. How do the audience perceive historical games, and especially how do they understand the history in the games? How do they understand the historical accuracy in the games? Are games accurate for them, and why? So I think these are the three main methods we can say how to write and research historical games.
That last part really takes me to what I think is the big question, particularly for MISA and audiences. Are historical games historically accurate?
Oh, it's a very provocative question which opens a black hole of discussion. Yes. I would say that, we cannot call any game absolutely historically accurate because, first of all, we are distanced from the past, and what we have is some remains of the past. We have some sources, occasionally we have some maybe archaeological remains, but still we cannot reconstruct the absolute vision of the past, how the history was. We know just how our predecessors interpreted the past, and we are doing the same now. So what the games are doing is practically the same. They are reconstructing history, trying to do so, or maybe they are reshaping it.
I personally think that they're because historical games are part of popular history, like for example, historical novels or historical movies. I don't think that any of it can be historically accurate. What is historically accurate? It's not possible. We are always, even the historians, so-called scientists, are only interpreting some historical sources. So we are maybe getting closer to the past, but we never know what really happened in the past. So I would say that using like historical accuracy as a term is pretty misleading, especially for the players who are not historians. Recently, I was in Gdańsk in Poland, and I had this one really interesting exchange of thoughts with a professor from Britain. It's really important in the connection with the historical accuracy. I told him that there is no such thing as historical accuracy, and he told me, okay, but how can we then explain to the players that something is historically inaccurate? For example, that someone comes and says there was no Holocaust or something like this. And I think what he meant is not historically inaccurate, but he meant a bad history, a good history and a bad history. A good history is when it is well done according to the rules of historiography, that it went through criticism of your colleagues. It's agreed that your paper or your book is well written and everybody agrees with it. This is something that is good history. Bad history is something which is just contradicting it. And in terms of games, I think that good games about history are games that are able to transform some parts of the scientific history into the medium of game, which is really complicated because it's a different medium. So it's kind of remediated into games. But at the same time, it has to work as a game. It has to be entertaining. It has to be fun. It has to be playable. It has to be technological possible to make and so on. So I would say that yes, there is possibility of good history in games, but there is no real possibility of historical accuracy in games.
Okay, then I'm going to be quite provocative again. So here I am. I'm a player of an historical game in an area which I know a little bit about. And I meet some guy called Jan Hus. I quite like this guy, and someone wants to kill him, and I save him. He doesn't get killed. But you can do that in a game, can't you? You've said yourself, Jan, you can play history, you can write history, you can create history. I've just changed history.
Obviously, you can do that, which means that it will not be an accurate history, but that is not the goal of us studying the games, actually. So this is rather a reflection of also what Jan has just mentioned about the good and the bad way of transmitting history. So even if you save Jan Hus, it's fine, but the most important thing for us is to see how he is portrayed, why certain narratives about his life are chosen to be portrayed in the game. So I would say that we as historians should prioritize these questions of how and why history is chosen and how it is represented in the games, not who and what.
Yeah, but I think you've got to have a level of who and what in there.
If I just may add one thing, even when you play a game where you can kill Jan Hus or you can let him live, or you play as Jan Hus and you kill 1,000 people with a machine gun, it's still okay so far when it is presented by the developers as not historically accurate game. So far that okay, we are creating a game when we use some characters from the past and we use some topics from the past, and it's just for entertainment, then it's okay. But at the moment when such a game is created and the developers say, for some reason, mostly marketing reason, oh, it's perfectly accurate, this is how it was, then this is misleading because it's not historically accurate, it can't be. And I can imagine a game when you play in a historical setting and you will save Jan Hus. He's not burned in the stake and Constance, and he lives on and whatever. It can be very imaginative and can even help you understand the history. Because, for example, games like Civilization or Crusader Kings, these are strategical games. When you play, you decide what happens. The history is not moving in the same way as our real past. But still, you can learn a lot about the past because, for example, there is some interpretation in the game how the politics functioned, how the dynasties were interacting with each other, how the religion was functioning in the medieval society. So even though you are playing a contrafactual game, so you are playing a history that never was, you can still learn a lot of different conceptions, how the society in the past functioned, if it makes sense.
It does from an educated historian's point of view. I'm still thinking of the young man who doesn't know so much, which really actually takes me on to the next point I wanted to cover, because games seem to be a place where entertainment and education interact. They absolutely come together. So could games be used in schools? Can they be used for education?
I would say they certainly can, specifically because they are fun. If you are playing something which is fun, most likely you will enjoy it and hence you will memorize something useful. However, you should be very careful with the type of game you are choosing to play with, because as we have said, there are, well, let's call it good games, which can teach you about some complicated concepts. So, how the society functioned, how the economic relations developed in the period. And there are some bad games which were specifically created as means of education, but they transmit only one version of history. They can be created by, a powerful state. They want a certain history to be, let's say, less multi-theoretical, but rather univocal and patriotic. So you should be very careful in your selection.
Yeah, exactly. And I would add that this is the same like with movies or with novels. And I would say like most of the AAA commercial games use history to sell well, and it's interesting as in the same way as historical movies. These commercial games are mostly not designed to educate you in history. But there is a small portion of game, maybe 4 or 5% of the whole production, that are designed from the beginning as an educational tool. I should mention games by Czech developing company Charles Games, which is a spin-off company of Charles University. And they focus on educational games like Attentat in 1942 or Liberation 1945. And in these games, you learn about, for example, protectorate of when the Nazi ruled Czech lands, and you learn about the communist takeover of Czechoslovakia. But they are created by historians, and they use historical sources. They use different stories of real people, and they create fictional people, but they are composed from many different stories of the real people. And you go and you ask them about the past and what they experienced in the past and so on, and you learn not only about the time, like the Second World War and after, but you also learn a lot of the methods of historians. You can see and understand that different persons in the past saw different events in a very different way, and then it depends who you ask and how you ask. So yes, there are educational games, and they are special, and they are very effective when measured, comparing, for example, to the classical classes. There will be always only some auxiliary tools for the teachers. They never can really work as a real living teacher.
It's seeming to me that The games are very, very good if you're looking at the atmosphere, the way of life, ordinary people, a small village, a town. But if you're looking at what happens to the kings or the nobles, you might just go and get it totally wrong in a game, unless the rules prevent you from doing that. Am I misunderstanding something?
Well, it really depends on a game, because there are so many different types. If we talk about what Adam Chapman calls conceptual reconstructivist simulations, these are the classical big strategies. So you have a board, the same as you have in board games, and then you have so many figures and numbers and menus, so you control everything and you understand how the history works because you are moving armies and building cities and castles, and you are the supreme leader of a nation or of a kingdom. So this could help you to understand some conceptions about the past, not the past itself, but some history about the past. Then there is a different type of games called by Chapman realistic reconstructivist simulations. So these are mostly games when you see the whole world from your own eyes and you experience everything. So you move as a person or as a hero through the world, and you talk to the people and you fight and so on. So it's in real time, it's very immersive, and it's happening at once. So you can see the ships on the horizon, the ocean moving, you can hear the voices, you can hear the sounds of birds. So you are immersed totally in the game. These games are good for evoking these atmospheres of the past. Then there is not much distance between you and the history that you see in the game because it's in real time, it's experienced by your hero and so on. So there you can, I would say, it's more a kind of flavor thing, and I would say it's more complicated, the encounter with the history, that in the conceptual constructivist simulations. So it depends on the game you play.
If I may add, it should be noted that these games, they also need to be sold. They need to be entertainment. They need to attract players. So it's not only history they are using, but also some expectations from the period, which means that if we are creating a first-person game about a certain medieval town, we need to portray it with a castle, with a church, maybe with some typical houses and so forth. And when we portray some power dynamics or societal dynamics, we also will include what the players think about the Middle Ages. And here in this regard, I can mention a brilliant chapter written by our colleague Aurelia Brandenburg, who actually studied how players perceive the Middle Ages, what they expect from a game which is set in the period. And, well, surprisingly or maybe not, she figured out that the players think that, for example, well, a super popular game based on a Polish novel, The Witcher, and it is a great game actually, portrays the Middle Ages based on 3 criteria. So first of all, the women are, well, suppressed, so they do not have much agency. It's mostly a male-oriented world. It's a violent world, which means that, well, you fight a lot. And it is a predominantly white-based world, so you cannot portray other races because the players expect the Middle Ages to be white.
Exactly, because The Witcher is a fantasy game, and still it's perceived as a medieval game by the players.
Exactly.
But also, this is what I've already mentioned, that the commercial games are not designed to educate you in history. So they use the history to attract the players. If they would present you with Middle Ages based on historiographical books, okay, this would be not perceived as the Middle Ages by the players because they don't read historiography. And also it will be boring. So what the developers try to achieve here is to kind of target what the people perceive as the Middle Ages. They want to make their games plausible and believable. And so when these games are perceived by the players as the real Middle Ages, although they are not even close to what the historians say, they sell well, and this is the goal of the developers. So it's not only a mass media, but it is also a product.
Jan, I was reading one of your papers recently, and you say that the importance of historians weakens as popular interest in history grows. And obviously, with gaming being so popular, interest in history is going to grow. So can you explain what you mean?
If you look back at the beginnings of history as historiography at the universities, so it's like the 19th century mostly, then first of all, the historians, they were the only ones who were more or less allowed in the society to explain history, to create meaning about the past. But then, as democratic societies evolved and as the historiography evolved at the universities and academies of sciences, then historiography became more and more specialized, more and more focused, more and more scholarly. So today, if a gamer or a average person is given a scholarly book, they do not understand it because the language, because of the terminology, because of the really very specialized focus. And on the other hand, the popular history as books and movies and games, they are pretty comprehensible and they are fun. So step by step, this popular history replaced historians in the society as people who or media that explain the past. So this is what is happening. And my opinion is that if the historians do not understand what is happening and that they should become more comprehensible and that they should approach the common audience, not only their colleagues, then they will lose even more. They will become really obsolete. And they should understand that their results, their scholarly results, should have some value for common people. For example, there is a game called Kingdom Come Deliverance. It's a game about 15th century Bohemia. And lots of gamers are talking about nations and nationality in the Middle Ages because of this game and how nationality and identity are portrayed in the game. But there is not much to read about it in the scholarly literature because scholars already left these concepts years and years ago, and they are more like the scholars of the 15th century Bohemia. They are more focused on religion and theology and intellectuals or even military history and so on. So then mostly the gamers who play Kingdom Come Deliverance, they will take the meaning about the past from the game. I think that explains a lot.
And if I may react to this, I would maybe continue Jan's line of argumentation, and I would say that we as historians, we should try to bridge the gap between us, academicians, and the audience, like the people who are watching films, reading books, playing games, and we should not tell them, oh, this is portrayed incorrectly. We should explain to them how the game actually creates this sense of the past, what types, what objects, what narratives of the past it chooses, what it teaches us about the past, and so forth.
So it's not so much that historians are less important. Perhaps, though, that people who study history as intensively as you two do should be thinking in communicating it in other ways.
Yeah, maybe more inclusively to the common public. Maybe to choose, a less elitarian approach, if I can coin it. So to try to be closer to the public, yes, that's what I would call it.
Yeah, and at the same time, I think that we should, and the historians should, understand how the society is communicating about history. You have to know the language, the rules of communication to intercept and explain your take on history. So I think this is also important to study the popular history to understand what common people, so to speak, know and think about history.
And if I may add, what they are told about the past by other people, so not by historians, but maybe by school teachers or maybe by their states, by their political actors, and so forth.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that actually brings me on to my next point for you, Olga, is that I know you've been researching the Russian government and how it's using games to influence players. Can you explain what's going on here?
Thank you for the question. It is actually a super important topic to discuss because so far we have discussed digital games as funny means of interaction with a certain vision of the past. But actually, in some contexts, well, mostly non-democratic, as some recent scholarship has stated, so mostly like Jade McGlynn and Nikolai Kopasov in the Russian case, history, no matter whether it's medieval history or the history of the last century, has become a new sort of political ideology, and it has been transmitted elsewhere to the common people, and people believe it. And people use this version of history to construct their national identity, which obviously takes political function. So I can very briefly discuss what I'm working with to give you just a very understandable example. So I'm working on the Russian materials, and in Russia, as of recently, the video games market is tending to be more and more controlled. I'm talking about the creation of the video games sponsored directly by the Russian state. So we have a specially created Institute of the Internet Development, within which we have a special fund for the video games development. And the first product of this beautiful fund is an almost AAA game, which received a lot of money from the state and also from some independent actors. So if I'm not mistaken, it is millions of euros. And the main goal of this game, which is called Smuta, is to, and here I cite the developers, portray a correct version of Russian history. So not the distorted version by some other historians, but the version which is officially accepted and approved by the state. So we are playing an early 17th century nobleman who is participating in the time of troubles, so a very turbulent period when Russia was actually at the risk of collapsing. So the ruined dynasty has died out, the Polish-Lithuanian army invaded the Russian land, and we need to, well, sort the things out. The game sounds as a pretty innocent material, actually, so we need to defend the motherland and that's it. But if we look at the current context in which the game is portrayed, it is not what it is. And I can give you one example of how the game inserts some pretty contemporary and politically charged reading of the 17th century history. So, for instance, the game is based on a 19th century novel by Nikolai Zagoskin, which obviously did not have any discussion of LGBTQ characters. But the game itself has a dialogue scene of the main character talking to a German mercenary, where the main character asks him, "Oh, is it true that in Germany you have some men dressed up as if they are women?" Which obviously is not a historical reading of the period, but rather a presentist one, a political one, which correlates to what the contemporary Russian government says about the Rotten West and its values.
Yes. History is always going to be damn good propaganda for someone.
Exactly.
May I?
Yes.
Exactly this, what Olga has just mentioned, is a really good example and very telling example, and I would say, even more simple example to demonstrate why and how we should study history in games. In this case, it doesn't make sense to, look for historical accuracy because it's not there, it won't be, but we should really look at the context, how the game was made and who did it, for whom and why, and then look at the representations in the games. So why they focus on one group, not the other, and why it ignores some characters and so on. How it creates, for example, enemy, how it treats religion, how it treats other nations, and so on and so on. And then obviously, like games like Smuta are a propagandistic tool. And if we do understand how the developers create such a game, then we can understand the game and we can decipher it as a propagandistic tool. Otherwise, we don't understand it and we will immerse ourselves in the gaming history and we will believe in it.
I will give you more data which would confirm that Smuta is actually a real propagandistic tool. So Smuta has been free of charge distributed across, the majority of the Russian internet clubs or like computer clubs, because the developers stated that they want this educational tool to reach as many young Russian children as possible, to teach them about a real, patriotic version of the Russian past. And also some additional products related to the game are distributed in Russian museums and occasionally in Russian schools. So these are like guided tours across Moscow, Nizhny Novgorod, Smolensk, and so forth. So the main places where Smuta took place. And there, the character on the screen actually teaches you histories. So he tells you, okay, this happened because of X, Y, Z. This happened in the year X, Y, Z. And in the end of this tour, you need to pass a test. So basically, this propagandistic tool teaches you one univocal version of history, officially approved by the state, which promotes a certain patriotic sentiment.
If I just may one last thing, thank you, Olga, that you are talking extensively about Smuta, because it's such a good example, even for the construction of notion of historical accuracy for the players, like how the players perceive it, because it's like a photorealistic game, it's very immersive and so on, and exactly like what do we know about the Middle Ages in this area, or what do we know about other Middle Ages? Okay, we can maybe reconstruct from archaeological excavations some ground plans of buildings. We can maybe reconstruct some weapons. We can reconstruct some chronicles or something like this. But if you are playing this game, you are talking to common people. They are telling you these propagandistic things. We have no idea what the common folk was talking about, what they were doing 24 hours a day. So this is really only a construction of some feeling about the past, and in this case used for propaganda of the Putinist regime.
And maybe just to close the discussion of Smuta, so we should be very careful while defining it as a propagandistic content, because the game itself is not super propagandistic. So, okay, it has this super provocative dialogue scene, but I would say that narrative-wise, it's not very propagandistic. So the most important thing for us is how the game is distributed and how the developers frame it. So what is the function of the game? So first, it is an educational patriotic tool. And second, it is often distributed at some public historical festivals by the representatives of the State Historical Military Society, which is important because it is one of the most efficient propagandistic tools in contemporary Russia. And third, it is distributed next to digital archives which list, for example, the graves of the soldiers who died during the Second World War and the soldiers who died during the current war between Russia and Ukraine. So if we look at this external layer of interpretation, we can actually see that indeed it is promoted together with super propagandistic projects.
I just have one last thought, if I may. Yeah, it's obviously a mixture, of pure entertainment, of some parts of historiography, and together with propaganda, So it's this mixture of all these things, but definitely it is not a reconstruction of the past. So this is the most important part. And I think what is important about these games, about these propagandistic games, is that they pretend that they are accurate, especially in the marketing. They say this is the accurate, this is like the time machine and whatever. So they are selling you the past, but they are giving you something else.
I think if I saw a game saying this is a time machine, I wouldn't bother to read the fact that it wasn't real history. I'm in a time machine and I'm going back to whenever. Well, of course it's real. Guys, for my final question, because we are running out of time, I'll ask both of you, what do you think would be the best practice within digital games for treating medieval history?
This is a difficult question. I would say if we talk about historical games, we should talk about historians, we should talk about gamers, and we should talk about developers. I think, and what I've experienced from all these parties, is that we should all keep open mind. Historians should be open to different media and to explain how they construct history, like as historians, and not to fight the new media, not to see them as competition, but something that can bring people to history. And in the same time, I would say developers should be also keep open mind and not to pretend that they are reconstructing the past and that what you see in the game is real and it shows you how it was in the past, but really to be honest with the players and maybe talk more to the historians and maybe involve them in the creation of games, which is already happening with, for example, Paradox Interactive, a Swedish game company, and their game Crusader Kings 3 and others. There are so many more examples. I think like these two forces, the developers and historians, then can easily approach gamers, and still historians can talk about their historiography and developers can still be successful in the entertainment business. I think it's not one against the other.
And maybe to end this beautiful remark, I absolutely agree with it. I would say that from a broader perspective, we historians should maybe engage more in the public side of history to provide a more critical stance of what we know about history. So by creating this critical awareness of how the visions of the past are constructed, or for example, that we have several different opinions on a certain event, why it happened, how it happened, and what the consequences of this event were, we can teach a little bit the gamers to look critically at how this past is portrayed in the games. But I would say that it's a super idealistic view because it requires a lot of investment, so both financial and, like human resources.
Yeah, but I think it would go further than just history. If you could get people thinking critically about the world around them, maybe the world would be more comfortable to live in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and anything to add?
From my experience, the university students of history and other humanities and even social sciences, as they were growing up with digital games, so they are much more used to digital games and it's like normal part of their life, the same way as books or movies or television. And so they are like more open-minded towards games. I know many examples where the young people were brought to history and to study history by the games they were playing. And then sometimes they come back and they are coming into game studies and they are researching the games. And this is my experience from my presentations and from me teaching at the Faculty of Arts. I'm so inspired by the students, how they think about games, not seeing games as apart from the society and culture. They see it inside the society and culture. This is super important. The games are existing in the same society and culture as historiography, and it will be like this always. So we have to live with each other and we have to understand each other. We have to understand the roles of engagement, how the historians treat history when they're constructing it, how the games treat history and use history when they're constructing it. And this is these rules of engagement that were mentioned by Robert Rosenstone, the film historian. I think this is the important to understand the media and then to understand each other.
Thank you. And thank you both. And on that inspiring note, I think we're going to have to leave it there because we've run well out of time. Thank you both for coming through and talking to me and the MESAM audience about gaming, doing history today. It's been fun, fascinating, and I think I'm going to start gaming.
Thank you so much for having us and for giving us this platform to speak.
It was great. Thank you.
You're both very welcome. And my thanks to everyone for listening. I hope you found it as interesting and thought-provoking and challenging as I did. Please do look out for the next MESAM podcast in which MESAM members and associates talk about their current or recent research into the medieval world of Central Europe. And if you have research that you or your colleagues are doing and you would like to talk about it to MESAM, please do contact me through the MESAM board or website administrator. In the meantime, I'm Karenkalova for the MESAM podcast. Thank you and goodbye until the next time.